afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'd like to welcome you back to another Webicway Supply Road live streaming session. Today, we are going to continue with our discussions on a variety of topics as we move through the next phase of the environmental assessment process after the terms of reference approval. Every other week on Wednesdays at this same time, we will discuss a new topic and want to encourage you to provide us with as much input as possible by calling or texting us with your questions or comments. And you can call or text us toll free at 1 844 424 0500. That's 1 844 424 0500. And just to remind everyone, we are doing these streaming sessions to help community members and the general public better understand what is involved in the federal impact assessment and provincial environmental assessment processes, and to encourage viewers and listeners to participate in these two activities. I'm actually flying solo today with no co-host, but I have my loyal and very talented technical team supporting me, so bear with me. So in today's session, called simply Air, Noise, and Vibration Studies, we're going to talk about studies that aren't always thought of at first when thinking about an environmental or impact assessment. Typically, people think of the natural environment studies when they think of an environmental assessment. Um, so that's what makes us sort of different. These kinds of studies and other kinds of studies like visual environment studies are ones that people don't necessarily think of, right, when they think of environmental assessments. So hopefully this will shed some light on the work that's done on air, noise, and vibration, and hopefully in general this will help community members uh, under, understand the purpose of these studies and how important it is to participate actively in these studies. So let's get started with a quick run through of what we are going to cover today. First of all, we're going to lead off with where we are now in the project, and then we'll start off with the noise and vibration topic, followed by an introduction on noise and vibration, discuss spatial boundaries, temporal boundaries, guidelines, vibration guidelines, the measurement of background noise levels, noise monitoring locations, noise monitoring results, and finally mitigation methods. And then when it comes to air quality, we're going to talk about uh, provide a bit of an introduction to that, talk about information collection, valued components, and then finish off with mitigation methods. And then we will wrap things up by talking about what's coming up next. So where are we now? If our team can turn to slide number 3, please. So last October 8th, we reached a project milestone for the Webquay Supply Road project. Our EA terms of reference, our environmental assessment terms of reference, was approved by MECP. And this then meant that we could then move officially into the EA phase or environmental assessment phase of the project. And because our work plan had been officially approved, and now we can focus on completing the environmental assessment report since we now know exactly what's expected of us. So let's move and talk a bit about noise and vibration in terms of an introduction. So what is sound? Well, sound is changing pressure in a fluid medium such as air or water as well. Um, and noise, the simplest definition of noise is it's defined as unwanted sound. And in terms of vibration, vibration is the repetitive motion of an object, surface, or fluid. And it may travel through air, the ground, or water. So maybe one of the easiest ways to sort of talk about sound and sound levels is because is maybe to give examples. And sound is measured in units called dBA. And so I just thought I'd put this table up here. This is slide number 5 in our PowerPoint. Um, and just to give people an idea of what dBA level very faint is. So human breathing has a sound level of 5 dBA. Then you move into what you call faint sounds. And this would be like a whisper, and that would be 25 dBA. Then you move up to moderate sounds. So if you look at maybe a suburban area, or let's say a rural area, something closer to what the environment might be in Webequie. Typical rural areas, noise levels are around 45 dBA. Then if we move into the category called loud, let's take normal human speech that's from a meter away. That's 65 dBA. And then we move to very loud, very loud. So very loud would be a jackhammer, 15 meters or 50 feet away. And then when you get into deafening, that's stuff that's more like a rock concert. So 100, that's a rock concert's 115 dBA. And then the point at which the level at which you feel pain in your ears because of something being so loud would be around 120 dBA. So hopefully that gives you an idea of the different sound levels. So if our team can move to slide number 6, I will talk a bit about spatial boundaries. So generally speaking, for most studies, the spatial boundaries are based on the project footprint, the regional study area, and the RSA or local study area, LSA. Noise and vibration is a bit different though. These are highly localized effects and they don't affect um, things on a regionally sized level. So the RSA and the LSA, the regional study area and the local study area, are actually the same. So specifically for noise, the RSA or LSA used in our assessment is defined as within 1.5 kilometers of the boundary of the settlement part of the community of Webequie First Nation and the airport, and then within 600 meters of the proposed roadway center line. And at these distances, the noise from the roadway and airport operations and roadway construction activities is expected to basically dissipate to background conditions in a fairly short distance. When it comes to vibration, the RSA or LSA used in the assessment is within 200 meters of the blasting activity. So vibration is typically associated with blasting activities. In this case, the blasting would be done for the purposes of creating of taking rock and creating construction material, whether it's like aggregate sized rock or medium sized rock, such as riprap that might be used to protect culvert outlets. And so vibration is sort of it's focused more really on one set of activities related to this project, and that's blasting. If our team can shift to slide number 7, please. We will talk about temporal boundaries. And when I say temporal, I mean time. So um, noise is typically assessed separately during for both the construction and operations phases because there's different levels of noise, there's different types, sources of noise as well. And then vibration is assessed only really during construction because most of the blasting that would take place would occur during construction. It might happen later on, very occasionally, if there's a need for more rock for maintenance of the road as well. So just to remind our viewers that they can call or text us toll free at 1-844-424-0500. That's 1-844-424-0500. And let's now move and talk about noise guidelines. Different noise guidelines exist for different project components. So for the road component, there's 3 sets of guidelines that are applicable. One is the MTO Environmental Guideline for noise. There's another one that's the MECP or MTO protocol for dealing with noise concerns during the preparation, review, and evaluation of provincial highway environmental assessments, long title. Um, and then there's a guideline called the Health Canada Guidance for evaluating human health impacts in environmental assessment, noise. And then other project components that have guidelines associated with them would be the permanent aggregate or bedrock extraction sites. And then there's a guideline associated with that from MECP. And then the airport, which is not technically part of a project component, but it sits near our project area. It has its own applicable guideline as well, too. So how do these noise guidelines actually work? Well, just to give you an example, the MTO and MECP roadway noise guidelines are based on a change between background noise levels. So when there is no project, so current conditions, and versus if the project's actually built. So they project what the noise levels might be after the project is built. They compare them with the guidelines, or they compare them with when there is no project built, current conditions, and when there is a change in background sound levels between the no build and future build greater than 5 dBA, then an investigation into noise mitigation is actually required. So that gives you an idea of sort of how the noise guidelines actually work. When it comes to vibration, vibration is only assessed during the construction phase. Um, and the reason why is because the effects of vibration are not likely during the operations phase. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. There are provincial and federal guidelines, and they relate to situations where explosives are used, as I mentioned before, those blasting activities. So there are different guidelines. There's an MECP guideline for blasting. There's an MTO provincial standard for the use of explosives for the purposes of blasting. There are DFO guidelines for the use of explosives in Canadian waters as well too. So there are three sets of guidelines that are applicable in the case of vibration. So let's talk a little bit now about the measurement of background noise levels. There was work done in the community where these noise recording devices were installed between October 29th and November 1st of last year. And there were three locations. I'll show you the map in a second. There was M1, which was a location within the community at the western end of the Webequie Supply Road route. There was location M2, which is 10.57 kilometers southeast of the western end of the road of the WSR, the planned WSR, and that's being used as representative of remote conditions far away from the community. And then finally, there was the M3 monitoring location, which was 4.41 kilometers along the proposed route, away from the community, but along the proposed route. And this was used as representative of conditions along the route. So if our team can move to slide number 12, there we are, noise monitoring locations, that will show you, you can see M1 in the upper left, actually sitting right on the edge of the settled part of the reserve. And then down the road, the proposed road from there, you see M3, which is still on Eastwood Island and where the settlement is. And then further down to the southeast, there is location M2, which is off the road corridor, but so it's considered a remote location. If our team can now move to slide number 13, please. So let's talk a bit about mitigation, noise and vibration mitigation, and some of the methods that could be used. So where applicable provincial and federal noise criteria are exceeded, um, mitigation measures can be used. Now, mitigation is a word that we use a lot in these presentations, and we use a lot when we talk about environmental assessments or impact assessments. And mitigation just means um, eliminating or mainly limiting impacts. So mitigating or limiting impacts, sometimes eliminating, but generally limiting impacts, reducing impacts. And so the kinds of methods that could be used are relocation of equipment, uh, selecting equipment that might be quieter, upgrading equipment with maybe better quality mufflers that muffle the sound better and reduce the sound levels. The use of physical types of structures such as berms, small hills, noise walls, or other acoustical screens you probably have seen on major highways, the noise barriers that separate residential communities typically from major highways. Um, you could redesign blasting operations so that they wouldn't exceed the noise guidelines as well. Different equipment could be used. There's lots of different approaches when it comes to blasting. Um, Another mitigation method could be just a development of a construction code of practice where applicable noise emission limits would be set for equipment, noise and vibration guiding guidelines for blasting and operating times of construction vehicles, heavy equipment, considerations of selecting certain kinds of equipment, as I mentioned before, and equipment for construction and for maintenance as well, for ongoing maintenance in the longer term, and then just methods for handling complaints with regard to noise as well. So there are a number of mitigation methods available. Let's now move to talk a bit about air quality. And just by means of an introduction, the air quality studies typically involve modeling, and you're modeling for potential, uh, temporary, or permanent effects on key sensitive locations. And when I say sensitive locations, we also call them receptors. So these are locations where the project could have an effect on air quality, water, or vegetation. Um, these sensitive locations, just to put it in a proper perspective, a community perspective, they could include hunt cabins, they could include spiritual sites, community centers, hospitals. They could include habitat for species at risk, such as caribou, as well. Too. Another example that's mentioned here is where there are medicinal plants that are used by the community as medicine. Um, those would be sensitive locations because those are plants that are harvested and used by community members as medicine. So maybe dust fall could impact them as well too. So this is what we mean by sensitive locations or sensitive receptors. Um, the types of project activities that are associated with impacts on air quality include heavy equipment use, blasting, aggregate extraction, vehicle traffic, um, gravel roads creating dust, use of diesel generators, and there's many others. The kinds of contaminants that are looked at include diesel particles, carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, sulfur oxide, ground level ozone, volatile organic compounds, and then finally polyaromatic hydrocarbons. So there's a lot of different chemicals that contaminants that are looked at as in terms of the air quality monitoring. And then the results of the modeling are compared with both the federal, which are Canadian air quality standards, and the provincial or the Ontario ambient air quality criteria. If we can move to slide number 15, please. We'll talk a little bit about information collection for air quality. The types of information collected would be and again, this overlaps a bit into climate change and greenhouse gases as well, but we might talk to community members about changes that they've seen and trends in climate and any impacts that those have had on lands and resources. We would talk to construction and operations or maintenance experts on the kinds of activities undertaken, the expected volume of vehicles using a road, the types of equipment, construction equipment used, and the typical emissions from that equipment, the duration that equipment is used for during the course of, let's say, for example, construction in the project. Um, and then talking about maintenance as well, the extent and frequency of maintenance operations on the new roadway, use of electric power for building, sheltering, maintenance vehicles and equipment. We will look at climate data as well too, because again, we're looking at climate change, we're looking at greenhouse gases. We would look at baseline air quality conditions, so we have something to compare to. Um, and then indigenous knowledge just feeds this all aspects of this as well too. So there's a lot of different types of information that are collected as part of this work. And now let's talk a little bit about valued components associated with air quality studies. Um, so when we talk about valued components, we're talking about things that are being studied, criteria, things that are being studied as part of the air quality study, for example. And then indicators, what indicators mean, indicators are ways of measuring things. So indicators for air quality might be qualitative and quantitative assessment of changes in ambient air quality. They could be vehicle exhaust emissions, they could be dust emissions, and then also greenhouse gas emissions. And the reason for selecting these kinds of indicators is, first of all, sensitivity of human health to those air quality changes, and then sensitivity of the environment, like we talked a little bit about before, to soil, the environment, including soils or plants or animals, to changes in air quality. So those are the valued components associated with the air quality studies. And then finally, let's wrap things up by talking a bit about mitigation methods, and these are broad, these mitigation methods, because they include, again, looking at greenhouse gases, looking at not only air quality but greenhouse gases, looking at climate change as well too. So some of those methods might include using low carbon or renewable fuel in the heavy equipment that's used for construction purposes, minimizing the idling, the engine running, when the equipment isn't actually doing any real work, to reduce fuel usage, and emissions, obviously. Um, then there's on the design side to limit impacts. You develop road foundations and different designs to limit how much peat would be removed as part of road construction. This is something that we're looking at very seriously, because quite a section of our 60-kilometer section of our planned road goes through the James Bay lowlands. So we're looking at various designs for what you call floating roads or rafted roads that sit on top of the peat. So this would very much limit the amount of peat that would have to be removed. Other methods could be limiting ground disturbance and vegetation removal by trying to make the footprint of the road as limited and as narrow as possible, as long as it meets the required safety requirements. Um, when it comes to when we're talking about climate change and extreme events, sizing watercourse crossings properly to to anticipate higher flows of water in the future, protecting water crossing outlets or inlets with rock, such as like riprap rock, to protect them from being washed out during significant events that might occur as part of climate change. Um, and then designing the road, the geometry of the road, so that it's and how it's topped, the surface of the road, to accommodate increases in intensity of rainfall that could lead to washouts, to making sure that road stays operational. And then during operations and maintenance, incorporating techniques and storage of materials to minimize erosion or loss of stockpiled materials such as gravel. Um, we also have conducting and collecting groundwater information, understand groundwater groundwater levels and changes in groundwater levels, to make sure that the road is not causing any significant impacts on groundwater levels, and designing the road to account for any potential increase or decrease in groundwater levels from climate change, basically. So there are a lot of different mitigation methods associated with air quality and greenhouse gases and climate change as well. So I hope everyone found that interesting today, and I'll just tell you a bit, if we can move to slide 18, tell you a bit about what we're going to talk about 2 weeks from now, on Wednesday, May 18th. 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about wildlife and species at risk. So I hope you can join us for that. And with that, that wraps up today's speedy WSR session. I hope you enjoyed it today. It was a big topic, lots to talk about, and I hope you can join us again in a couple of weeks when we talk about wildlife and species at risk studies, as I mentioned before. And please don't forget to visit our site at supplyroad.ca, or see us on social media via WFN Supply Road. We want to make this environmental assessment and impact assessment as clear and transparent and comprehensive as possible. And in order to do that, we need your participation as well. So that's why we are here talking to you and trying to explain these topics to you. We want you to participate. We want you to provide input from your community, and it will make this environmental assessment and impact assessment that much better. So, thank you again for joining us today, Miigwech, and we will see you again in 2 weeks.